Thank you very much for joining us today for our New Epoch, New Leader event on the opening day of the Bristol Technology Festival. I'm really excited to welcome our two speakers today, Katie Tanner and Mark Pullen. Katie's the director of our leadership development team at Robert Half and acts as a coach and mentor for our global leadership team. Katie will be talking about how the leadership role has evolved more in the last 8 months than it has probably in the last 50 years, and how leaders can equip themselves with change-ready skills in order to adapt and thrive. And then we've got Mark Pullen, who's the CEO of Xledger. That's one of the fastest growing companies in Bristol and one of the up-and-coming tech companies in the UK. And Mark will hopefully put that theory into practice and give some real-life examples of his leadership journey during this time. And then the last half an hour will be Q&A session. So please, throughout the event, guys, just put your questions in the chat throughout the presentations, and we'll do our best to gather those and answer them in the last half an hour of the event. So with that, I'd like to kick off and I'll pass over to Katie. Over to you, Katie.
Thank you, Leo. So afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today. I guess our hope is to give you in the next hour or so really an opportunity to explore what the next normal may look like for you and your team in terms of your leadership. So we're really fortunate today that Mark has joined us. He's a CEO, as Leo just said, of a company called Xledger, and he's going to give us a snapshot of his story in terms of how his team and his business transitioned and flourished over the last 7 or 8 months, and hopefully bring to life some of the qualities that I'm going to talk about today. So as Leo said, I guess the economy, as we all know, is evolving at an unprecedented rate, and I think every single leader has faced far greater levels of disruption than ever before. And when you look at the last, I guess, 50 or 60 years of predominant leadership style, it's taught us, I guess, to be all about control, building consistency in our decisions and executing. And if we look at those qualities, they are without a shadow of a doubt still really important. But I guess we now need to balance that with much more future orientated, change ready skills to keep ourselves moving forward within the world that we've all now found ourselves within. So I think now is probably the single most important time to look at leadership, and what has changed and what we have learned in the last 7, 8 months has probably been more in the last 50 or 60 years. Some of the things I'm going to talk about today are from our own experiences at Robert Half. We're very privileged to partner with lots of businesses in the Southwest. And I guess we're quite a good barometer of what's going on, but we're also going to pull upon McKinsey, Korn Ferry and Deloitte's research as well. So I think what we've seen, as I'm sure you have in your own businesses, I guess a new epoch, a new breed of leader emerging. And the leaders of today are having to really lean into personal development, embrace uncertainty, navigate complexities like never before, that ability to lead with empathy, but also have that natural curiosity and being able to fail and learn fast. And it's those leadership skills that are taking businesses, companies, teams from surviving to thriving in this uncertain world. Before we talk about the specific leadership skills, I just want to, I guess, make an important distinction between what was, as you can see on the slide, what is and what can be. And what was is no longer. There's endless research on change management that tells us that people need to accept what is changing and let go. And the quicker you do that, the better. What was is really being able to navigate then towards what can be, and actually letting go and getting to that place of acceptance, surrendering to the changes. That's really hard. I've personally really struggled with that. That does elicit feelings of disorientation. It can, affect morale. And for some, it can bring up feelings of resentment and anger. And, maybe think of your own response over the last 8 months to some of the changes you've had to navigate. But I think the quicker we can address current challenges and get to the point of what is, it allows us to then provide clarity on what has changed, why it's changed, and how quickly you can pivot your business, your team, to a position of financial and cultural health. So the what can be is the most critical stage. This stage is the exciting stage. This is where we can influence, we can strategically be innovative, we can plan. And when you start building capacity, whether that's in your human capital, redefining your business models, examining the technology that we need to take our business to the next level, that's where you as a leader I guess you are uniquely poised at this pivotal time to really guide and shape your organization. So we're going to turn now to the specific qualities, but all I would say is, maybe just a question for you to think about. And if you want to pop it into the chat function, in your current leadership role, what has stayed the same and what has changed? Maybe just sit with that whilst we're just talking through some of the qualities in a moment. So when we think about the challenge that leaderships are, I guess, posed with, the balance that we now have to adhere to, get to, is balancing that traditional control and command with agility and flexibility. And that is no mean feat. Let's not underestimate the personal challenges as a leader we've all had over the last 8 months. And I think, when you think about the paradoxes, the tensions, none of them have got clear solutions. 1 minute we need stability, the next minute we need change. 1 minute we need to lead with empathy, the next minute we need to make very tough decisions. And I guess some really good examples of that would be, we've all had to be the expert and the learner. We've had to blend our ability, our deep knowledge of expertise with an openness to learning new processes and technology. You've got this tactician versus visionary. I shouldn't say versus actually, because it's but that ability to create and be the North Star for your team, whilst on the other hand, providing ideas and goals that are grounded in reality. So I guess, there's so many more I could give you, but I guess research would tell us the best thing that we can do is not overemphasize on one rather than the other. You kind of have to naturally toggle effortlessly between them. But this takes a hell of a lot of self-awareness, having that ability to be open to learning and adapt, having that contextual awareness of when knowing to pull one lever more than the other. And I kind of use the analogy of that sixth sense of knowing what to do, even when you don't know what to do. So we're going to go to the anagram now, and we've built into the word shape. And what you'll see on here on your screen is 5 qualities. And we're going to talk through each one of these desired leadership qualities, and we'll explore each one of them very briefly. But really what this is all about is about how leaders now need to self-disrupt. They need to challenge the status quo. For us to be successful in this new world, it's about being agile, self-aware, emotionally and socially intelligent, purpose-driven. So maybe as I'm talking through these letters, maybe think about what stage you're at with each one of these, and perhaps which one would be maybe give you the greatest opportunity in terms of having the greatest impact with your leadership. So we're going to start with the first one, which is seeking opportunity and to anticipate. And as you can see, there'll be some questions coming through on the screen. I'm not going to read those, but maybe if you just think about those and maybe sit with them and think about how you, your team, your organization has sought opportunity and anticipated those. So we all know now more than ever, we've all had to explore our mindset. It's probably quite a cliche to use that word, but if you look at your own personal current view, and I think this is really timely that we're doing this presentation, 5 or 6 days after we've gone back into a form of lockdown. It's kind of that deja vu Groundhog Day. And, maybe ask yourself, is your current view and reality focused on the challenges of over the next month? Or are you looking for those silver linings? Are you looking at what opportunities might be in front of you? And I think, that mindset, whichever one you are, will undoubtedly affect your mindset. It will affect your team, and it ultimately will affect your customers. So I think, every leader in any organization, but specifically those who've been with a team a company for a very long time, we need to get better at being uncomfortable being comfortable with being uncomfortable, that ability to take risks, not knowing the answers, almost just having a snapshot and having to make decisions based on that. And that requires letting go of the playbook of the past, because that's no longer going to guarantee future success. And that's really, really tough. And a really good question to ask yourself would be, how often do you stop and seek first to understand and ask questions before maybe deciding on the plan and how you're going to move forward? And I think all of the best leaders, and we'll hear about this from Mark later on, is devoting a certain amount of time to always thinking beyond these tough times, thinking about how we can transform when the worst is over. And by doing that, that really engages, it motivates, and it really allows us to turn, I guess, the present pain into hope and really challenge future possibilities. So maybe, have a think about your own examples of where you or your team can maybe look for seeking more opportunities versus the challenges. The next one we're going to look at is having a flexible and agile approach. And probably the word agility has been the most overused word in any leadership research I've read, anything that I've been part of. But it's kind of that magic word, I guess, right now. And I think as leaders, we really need to avoid the temptation sticking with a decision. That attempt to needing to look in control, be decisive, be that stable ground is really important, but also having that openness to constantly review information as it's coming in. I mean, it's still coming in. It's such a fast pace. If you think of the amount of times we're needing to course correct, that's okay. It's not a problem, but it's being open about the fact that we are going to need to course correct, because we are often making decisions with only half the information available. So I think I'm going to kind of float this idea of something called the self-disruptive leader. And this is someone who has a high tolerance for ambiguity. As I said earlier, that kind of gut instinct, that not knowing what to do, yet you do know what to do. And it's that ability to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And if you maybe reflect on your own organization, you can maybe think of some examples of that. I'm going to just give some key descriptives of what agility might look like within your team, because it is quite an ambiguous, vague word. And there was a great article I read by McKinsey who described how you can see whether you've got agility in your team or not, is obsessively being customer centric and committed to value, not just for your customers, but for internal team members, partners, stakeholders, communities. Number 2, working in a network of small, very empowered teams. Number 3, which we've certainly found in our own experience at Robert Half, is using rapid decision cycles. So breaking down the work into much more bite-sized small projects and executing on those projects in focused bursts. And then that allows you to frequently adjust your learnings and perhaps change direction if you need to. Number 4 is having a very strong people model. People being at the heart of every process, everything that we do, is that leads to higher engagement, higher motivation, which will obviously allow the organization to deliver value quickly and collaboratively. And then finally, radically rethinking technology and how it can support and provide customer value. So maybe, think about those. Would you say one of those descriptors feels true for your team, for your organization, your business? Just quite a useful thing to perhaps think about. Going on to accelerate innovation, and obviously this being a technology event, I'm sure there are many of you who can give many examples in your own business where you have adjusted technology, bought new technology, whatever it might be. And I think everyone's traditional model was challenged over the last 8 months. I know certainly we were in Robert Half, but actually we fundamentally had to transform probably in the space of about 4 days. We lifted and shifted, if we think of the UK, probably about 250 people to work from home. And we had to look at our technology, the way that our products and services are delivered. And, there are some great examples out there. Many of our clients in the retail sector had to quickly move to an e-commerce method of selling. We've had companies that have moved their systems from on-premises to the cloud to enable fully remote functionality. We've had lots of businesses implement new financial planning tools over over the course of the last 8 months to help improve scenario modeling. And we've had lots of businesses implement new supply chain model software to assess supply chain vulnerability. And if I give us some examples of our own in Robert Half, we've installed some new software ourselves to be able to offer candidate video shortlists. Maybe if any of our clients are on here today, you would have had one of those. But also internally, we have lots of virtual sales mornings now using lots of different technology to ultimately increase engagement. So maybe a good question to ask yourselves, and again, if you can put this in the chat function, I'd love to see it. What has been the most successful innovation for you and your team over the last 7 to 8 months? When you actually think about what you've done, it's quite surprising how much we have innovated in such a challenging time, which comes back to the seeking opportunity and seeing the silver lining. So I'll move on now to the next one, which is partnering to trust and advance. So I'm sure during the pandemic, the last 7 or 8 months, I'm sure we've all seen how competitors are pulled together. The classic one of Apple and Google pulling together for contact tracing. And I think, we've all collaborated more than ever before, which has been a huge silver lining. We've certainly found it in our industry. But if you actually think about all the traditional manufacturing companies that have been known for decades for maybe just producing one product, all literally within a 2 to 3 week period, were able to recreate their processes and respond to all the needs we had right at the beginning of the pandemic for the protective equipment. If you think of all the hotels that changed from being hotels into, respite for the NHS, for the homeless, it's quite... it's hard to remember it actually when I was rereading this presentation. And if you think back to April and May, everything that went on, it was phenomenal what was achieved within those 6 to 8 weeks from really collaborating, really pulling together. And I think, as a leader yourself, or perhaps someone in your team, now more than ever, is a great opportunity to partner, whether that's internally or externally, because I think all the innovations, all the good stuff doesn't happen in isolation. It happens when we come together. And I think leaders who maybe are still working in a protective mode, perhaps in that reactive space, they're not going to take their business to the next level. It is about coming together, not working alone. It is about that collaboration, that collectivism. And I think if you can avoid that command and control, that I guess gives more empowerment. It gives more original thinking. And I guess one thing I would really like to point out when I talk about partnering and collaboration, this isn't always about team harmony. This isn't about everyone agreeing. Productive confrontation can spark original ideas. And actually, I would argue needs to be encouraged sometimes, because I think productive confrontation is a real positive outcome of collaboration. That act of boldly sharing viewpoints and perspectives, while of course still being respectful, that really helps move a business forward. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is the role ultimately of the leader is about seeking to express, not impress. And I think if you put the people, you put the team at the heart of everything, you will always stay the right side of that expressing, not impressing your team. And then finally, we're going to talk about energize through empathy and purpose. And I think, the why, the purpose is always been there, but I think it is absolutely at the heart, the new strategy of everything that we do. It's quite literally the reason for why we do something. It's what drives you. It's what drives your team. It's what drives your organization. And, purpose is incredibly powerful. It unites people. As I alluded to earlier, if you think of all the companies that pulled together during the pandemic, whether that was global hotel chains shifting to providing housing for the NHS, for the homeless, think of all the restaurants that turned to takeaway services. You think of all the vehicle manufacturers who quickly developed at lightning speed to produce PPE equipment. I think when you've got a clear and defined purpose at that core of any organizational level, that creates focus, which means you can ultimately overcome challenging times. So, obviously it's important to have a company-wide vision and purpose, but it's also important that individuals have theirs, because it creates a sense of meaning, it creates a sense of belonging. And when you galvanize a team, is pretty powerful. And I think, again, Mark will be able to give some really good examples of how, his team exactly did that with people at the heart of it. and have flourished. So I think, ultimately leaders, as we know, you wear many hats. You're it feels like, you're a parent, let's say it many times. But I think ultimately our role over the last 8 months, and I'm sure will continue to be, we're often a counsellor in chief in many, many ways. And if you think about it, everyone on your team, yourself included, has been touched by this in some shape or form. And I think it's really important as leaders, we know that some of our people are going to be grieving at work, whether that's for loved ones, whether that's for loss of income, whether that's for just what was and wanting their old life back, whether it's, knowing when to encourage people to take a break, refer them to perhaps an employee assistance program, or do you know what, just give some heartfelt thanks or words of encouragement at the end of a tough day. That is where success will lie in the culture, and the culture is the shadow of the leader. So I think it's really key that we balance that energizing through empathy and purpose. So I've given you a whistle-stop tour. We can always share with you the McKinsey and the Korn Ferry articles that a lot of this is based on if you'd like to have more information. But when you think about the acronym of SHAPE and you think about your organization, where would your greatest opportunity be right now to have the greatest impact, from whether it's galvanizing and pulling your team together, whether it's focusing on accelerating technology, whether it's having a more agile and flexible approach? So what we're going to give to you, which hopefully you will get as an email follow-up, and apologies, this next slide is very, very busy, but I just wanted to give you a snapshot of what you're going to get, is basically a breakdown of each one of the letters from the acronym, and then some very practical tools that you can use with your team to really assess where you are at with those leadership skills, whether it be agility, innovation, and openness to new ideas. And then hopefully that will give you some practical tips of how you can help progress your team, your leadership style to perhaps where we need to be. So before I hand over to Mark and Leo and really, bring to life hopefully some of these qualities for you, I just wanted to share with you a quote. And this is based from a Korn Ferry article regarding the self-disruptive leader that I alluded to earlier. And it really talks about, our past is no longer a reflection of our future. I'm not going to read you through the quote because you can obviously read that yourself. But I guess the self-disruptive leader is all about challenging the status quo, thinking and acting differently, having that permanent, curious mindset, a compelling purpose. It's that feeling, as I said, I know I keep coming back to it, of knowing what to do even when you don't know what to do. And I think the pandemic has been the ultimate test and is continuing to be the ultimate test to all of us. We've all learned many, many painful lessons, yet the leaders who've taken their business to a flourishing place have been able to use their self-destructive skills to pivot themselves and their teams to a place of reform and reimagination, and those leading with purpose, anticipating the changes in reality, partnering with competitors, building trust. They are the ones that are going to be ready to meet the future, but also be prepared to shape it. So thank you for joining today. I hope the perspectives and some of the insights have been useful. So I'm going to pass over to Leo now, who's going to interview Mark. And as I said, hopefully bring some of these qualities to life with a real life story. So all the best to you, your teams and your organizations. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Katie. Some really useful insights there. And we'll make sure that everybody gets those worksheets emailed out and hopefully have some practical takeaways that you can go and implement into your own businesses. So we have next up Mark Pullen, who is the CEO of Xledger. There he is. Hi, Mark. Just checking we can hear you okay.
Hi, Leo. How are you?
There we go. Yeah, good, thanks. So first and foremost, Mark, can you provide the audience with a brief overview of how you ended up as a technology leader from your roots in professional rugby?
Sure. Well, the fundamental obviously wasn't good enough at rugby. So I started while I was at university playing for a professional rugby team. It was the first year that the sport turned professional. So we called ourselves professional, although we weren't paid any money. So education was obviously a very critical part of the next phase of that. Because that became a job opportunity for a lot of people, those old heads like myself at the time who had come through the right schooling and the right network and so on, soon fell by the wayside. So the requirement was for me to go and get a real job, and I started in data. So over the years between then and now, have been involved in some of the world's largest data organizations, as well as having set up, run and sold on 2 of my own businesses. More recently joined Xledger because of the huge opportunity that I saw within finance and accounting and the migration to cloud for that business. I loved the culture. It's a Norwegian business by history and by trait, which is very family orientated, very balanced, and that really appealed to me. So I took the reins just over a year ago now. Perfect timing, just before a global pandemic. So it's been a fantastic challenge, and also obviously a terrible one. We would have wished to not have had to have gone through that. But that's kind of the whistle stop for myself.
Great. Well, I remember you telling me about the growth that Xledger have achieved since January. I think it was around 140%, which is outstanding, and certainly something that you don't see too much in the current climate. How have you transitioned as a leader to allow the business to flourish in these challenging times?
Yeah, good question. And I think this it's an interesting response, right? Because this is my version. This is our version. There was no right or wrong. So I think as soon as this started to happen, we as a business looked at how were we going to behave, and we didn't know. Everything was very much historically data driven. Myself as a CEO of several businesses historically, everything's been data driven. Everything has had an element of analytics, an element of fact, and an element of historic data to support decisions and strategies moving forward. First thing we obviously realized was there's no precedent for this. So you kind of go back to a bit of a gut feel, but nonetheless, we still looked at a very sensible, pragmatic approach. So we started with financial planning, as probably everyone sitting listening has done. We looked at various scenarios. We looked at our financial security. We looked at our war chest. We looked at then building out scenarios of what ifs. So I use a lot of my old sporting techniques of visualizing what good looked like. We started the year with grand plans, and we changed what we felt good would look like. And this was more into survival and appropriately behaving to support our community, our customers, our staff. So we reevaluated how our finances were going to be measured and essentially tore up our historic strategy and said, this is what good looks like now. And let's at least plan for some eventualities. And what are the triggers that we need to then behave and act against? The second thing we did was we took control of our lockdown. So we actually locked down earlier in our business, purely because I wanted that to be less of a panic for our staff. We are an office cultured business. We were all in the office all the time. And what I didn't want was I wanted people to have the opportunity to get their kit set up. Let's make sure that everyone has a desk, a chair, 2 screens, the charging equipment they need, the webcams they need, all of that, whilst we were able to manage that ourselves and travel around and come in and get kit. So we locked down a little bit early just to make sure we did that on our terms. From then, we immediately changed our marketing message. So we very much viewed ourselves as non-leveraging this scenario. And we came up with a campaign called Be Useful. And it became more of an ethos. It was our culture is driving us to let's just be useful. We audited our marketing. We said, pull everything that's sales orientated and refocus on being useful. We audited all of our customers that may be affected. We're multiple verticals that we operate within. So we looked at those most vulnerable. We approached them and we put a freeze on their fees. We went to partners who equally were going to be affected, those in bars, pubs, restaurants, gyms, all of those areas, and we reduced their fee structure. So the important thing for us was to have customers and partners at the end of this. Obviously, at the time, we thought it was going to go on for a short period of time, and it's elongated. We then looked at how do we support our community? And obviously, we're heavily involved with Bristol Sport. We aligned ourselves strongly with their culture. We love Bristol. We're proud of who we are. We have our identity very closely attached to the ethos and the sort of mentality that the guys have there. And we doubled down. We started reinvesting. So having great conversations with their leadership team, when they're expecting sponsors to pull out and consolidate, we actually doubled down. We said, what can we do to support? We have tried to help the foundation. These guys delivered 1 million meals over this period of time to disadvantaged people and homeless and so on. So there were some great causes. What that enabled us to do was to let our people know that we were empathetic, that this was no longer about our business. This was about supporting those customers, those companies, those communities around us. And that really galvanized all our people, made them proud to be part of Xledger. We didn't do any furlough. We were lucky enough not to get to that phase in our planning. But it was important that we really focused on, empathizing with our people, making them safe, creating a safe working environment, adapting our business processes so we could do everything remotely, but keeping them attached to the business. The byproduct of all of those things, and we were also the happy recipient, if I refer back to the A of SHAPE, of accelerating innovation. Obviously, we're a cloud-based system, so lots of organizations or prospects were coming forward and accelerating their move to the cloud for their finance systems. Our obligation was to be there to support that, be there to be able to implement over that period of time and help them get access and side of the functionality of their business. But that was a byproduct. That was a happy byproduct of look after our people, make sure we keep them attached to the company, focus on our community, focus on helping our customers where they could be. And the byproduct of that was we grew. So that's kind of the what we did in that challenging time. Now we can analyze and see what was successful. At the time, we were kind of just, hey, this feels right. This is what we should do. And that was sticking to our, what we coined a phrase, our cultural compass.
That's really fascinating. I think a lot of businesses can revert to just focusing on top line and bottom line, but I love that Be Useful campaign and how that's given you better results than possibly you would have done if you did it the more traditional way. So Katie talked a lot about the need for agility in leaders being more important now than ever. Where have you had to really listen to your gut instinct or your internal voice rather than the traditional sensible path, and what were the results?
Yeah, all the time. And as I sort of mentioned, I historically came from a very fact-based, data-driven decision model beforehand. That was, there's no data, so you have to change. So what did we do? We looked at, obviously, we hired heavily through this period. We tripled our employee base over this period, and we were very focused on the cultural element of our hiring. So what we thought, and I sat down with our leadership team and said, right, we've hired the right people. They've bought into a culture, and now that culture is going to come under test. We've got to stick to that. So we made everything based on a cultural compass. Practically, what I also did was expand out our management team. Experience gives you a gut instinct. That's where we've all been in scenarios, not the same as this, but similar. What are the adversity we've faced? What are the things that were made us successful? How do we become agility? How do we ask for forgiveness? All of those kinds of things. So I expanded out that leadership team to everyone in this building that has experience and could represent a function of our organization. So we put a new management team in place. They were very much there in an advisory capacity. They were there to question each other's gut feels. What feels right? So if you come to that sort of consensus, that's the message that filters out to everyone in the organization. There's absolute clarity on where that decision has been made from. It wasn't my decision. It was a collaborative, correct and sensible approach rather than this is just what Mark feels or what Ian feels or the sales director or whatever it might be. It was very much a collaborative approach to saying, what do we think is right here? And nobody was right or wrong, but we had that consensus. And what that meant was we looked and were a galvanized leadership team. We changed our vision. We changed what good looks like for us. We changed our measures. We put very much a bubble wrap around our people and said, these are the decisions we're making on your behalf. And the priority was obviously safety and so on. So what we were able to do was to move to that gut feel, that cultural compass, but we shared that. There were occasions where we nearly made some mistakes, and again, hindsight is a great thing. Luckily, what that enabled us to do was we would get together regularly to make these decisions. We would sleep on those. And the next day, twice or three times, somebody came forward and went, this doesn't quite feel right. And what was amazing was everyone in that room went, yeah, me too. I wasn't quite happy with the way this was going. So we allowed ourselves that freedom to say, we're not going to get it right straight away. We're going to talk it through. And we're going to come up with what we believe genuinely as people, not as business leaders, what's the right thing for our guys to do here? If it had been just me, I think some of those mistakes would have been made. You just crack on, don't you? And you say, that's what I'm going with, and you move forward. It was really healthy to expose that leadership of this organization to some key individuals that have that experience, that represent the whole business, and then can filter upwardly the messages from people. So we're listening, but also filter back the rationale behind what we're doing and allow it to be challenged. You know, one of the key things that we all learned as leaders through this is so we can get forgiven now. And many times I went to our employee base and said, look, this is what we're going to do. We might be wrong, but bear with us. If you've got better ideas or we've got it wrong, just let us know. And it was amazing the amount of forgiveness you got. And, you know, people celebrated the fact that, you know, we've got guys here that are looking out for us. They're going to go the right route. And we have an opportunity and a voice at that leadership table to try and make the best decisions.
Some great ideas in there. I think one thing that stands out for me is how did you manage to pivot and adapt so quickly almost on a daily basis without leaving the team feeling unsettled?
Yeah, good question. And I think the honest answer is probably we did and we didn't. So the first thing we started with was, what are we going to end up with? How are we going to be viewed? What's important to us? You know, I wanted to make our people proud, you know, proud to be part of Xledger and how it's behaved through this period. With that comes an acceptance of it's going to change. It may change daily, but what we looked at was, you know, you've probably seen this in many sort of coachings of leadership. You know, you start at this point, there's my objective, and there's a nice, neat and tidy straight line from one to the other. The greatest adage is that actually it was even more like that this time. Hey, we're going to have to jump around. What we had though was, because we were communicating, because they, you know, our staff knew that our first and foremost priority was their safety, their family's safety, then our customers, and making sure that they're safe and in an environment where we can influence, that they feel that we're the right people to be partnered with. That change then didn't deviate from the end result. It was just the options that were taken in between. And what we used to do as well was, you know, sometimes we didn't know. We were going with our gut feel, or what felt right, or what was closest to our cultural compass, was we would expose those options and we'd explain the reasons why we were doing something. Normally you don't have time for that, right? This time we definitively had to make that time by saying that this is the route we're going. These were some of the other options. This is why we feel this is right for us. You've all been employed. You know, 70% of our, you know, decision to hire an individual into Xledger is based on cultural fit. So we had confidence in that process. We had confidence that we had picked great people and people that had bought into our culture. All we had to do now was stick to that. It was times that we deviated from that people would go, oh, hang on a minute, you know, perhaps option 2 over there might have been better. So we stuck to that cultural compass. We made sure that we involved them or exposed the decision-making process to them. We had representatives from all those functions involved in all of those decisions. But ultimately, we kind of said, look, this is what we're going to go with. If we need to change this, then we will. And that's okay. And everyone, fortunately for us, said, yeah, okay, that's fine. So that level of forgiveness from our guys, you know, this is our team, this is our family. And they're kind of, you know, yes, they look to mum and dad to make the right decisions, but, you know, they're okay when we don't get it quite right. And they contribute, they understand why we did it. And we all kind of.
So it sounds like, although you were probably changing at a rate of knots, it was the vision and the culture that acted as the true north for everyone in the business, and you kept comms high throughout to make sure everyone felt that they were involved in the decision making. Perfect. So well, here we are again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Deja vu, as Katie said, lockdown 2.0. Good news is we've all been here before, so hopefully we're not all at panic stations. But what did you learn from the first lockdown, and what would you do differently this time?
Yeah, good question. I'd love to sit there and say nothing. We got it perfectly right. I think the first time, we're in a different environment now. The first time it was a bit scary. There were certain amounts of information that we'd been fed. We were following our government. Everyone had their own opinion on that, and we had to operate as businesses as we saw fit within that. Now there's a bit of hindsight. That, you know, back then it was novel, a little bit exciting. Everyone coming in, picking up their staff, talking to families about how they're going to focus on being at home and so on. This time, I think everyone's just a bit more irritated by it. We're bored of it now. Nonetheless, we're going to follow those guidelines. So what I'd actually look at is, you know, when we analysed what we did last time versus what we are doing this time, we're only really making one fundamental difference, which is the office environment. And we closed our office the first time, and there were some unforeseen byproducts of that. Very much around effectiveness and well-being. And as much as we could do on well-being check-ins daily, speaking to people, all that, there wasn't quite the same feel as being in an office and collaborating with your colleagues and seeing everyone. So this time we're obviously following the government guidelines, but under the guise of, if you're not effective at home, or you can't be effective for whatever your personal reasons are, or for well-being, we've made the office an open environment. So there's all sorts of rules. It's not that easy. You kind of got to fill in every survey and do your QR codes, but luckily we're now in a newer, bigger space, so everyone can space out and be COVID safe. But that was one of the things that we were now able to offer is, look, if you need to be in here, follow these rules, but come in. Do not use public transport. There's all sorts of those kinds of rules. Keep safe, but at the same time, let's focus on that well-being element. People are pretty fed up with this. Some people function fantastically. Some people don't. And I think as a business, we've got to accommodate and accept both. Equally, one of the things that we learned was actually, the sort of silver lining, if you sort of look at it that way, is how we operate as a business, what the expectations of our customers are. We believed we couldn't do a lot of things remotely. Now we can. So there was a lot of learnings in amending our processes that we had to do really quick. If this hadn't have happened, would we have bothered doing that? No. Are we better off now we've done it? Yes, we're far more efficient. We don't have to travel all over the place. We can do remote training, remote implementation. We're all very good now at the various different platforms that we need to use to communicate with each other. So that's been a strong learning, but yeah, not too many. I think every scenario is different. This time we're again going to say, this is what we're going to do. Hopefully it's just 4 weeks. So there isn't a huge amount of planning that needs to go into that versus the first time. We're kind of set up. People know they can do their jobs. They're comfortable doing it. What we're going to try and do is tweak and add and augment their experience to give them more variety or options if they do want to come.
Perfect. So just a quick reminder to the audience, we've got a few more questions left for Mark, but feel free as and when the questions spring to mind, just put them in the chat and we'll gather those questions then for the Q&A, which is kicking off in about 10 minutes time, and Matt will ask those questions on your behalf. So feel free, any questions that you've got for Mark or Katie or myself, just put them in the chat and we'll go through those in the after party. So I remember, Mark, when we spoke early in lockdown part 1, you probably had some of the most innovative and fun ideas, I guess, in terms of keeping your team engaged and motivated during the pandemic. So it'd be great if you could share sort of what steps you've taken to keep your team feeling that way throughout this time.
Yeah, so again, we kind of didn't really know. And I think at the time, one of the things that we started to realize was when everyone is working from home, functionally, they're fine. They're providing a function to the business. However, what we also become is functional. And what you lose is that attachment to your business. People are talking in their bubbles to their colleagues, but it becomes more confined. So what we quickly decided to do was, let's come up with a way that make sure that people knows we're thinking about them, make sure they know that we're very focused on keeping them safe and so on, but also let's provide the mediums for getting together, speaking to people outside of your usual bubble. We did things like the quizzes. Now, I'm going to tell you sort of some of the things we did, but most of them were about enabling through alcohol, essentially. We became a bit of an enabling culture. But what we used to do was we would set these quizzes, we would try and get as many people on those as possible with their families. And we would send gifts out. So the prequel for that quiz was a gift. So sometimes it was cocktails. We had these little pouches you can get with various different cocktails that we felt represented those people. We also found things like an amazing one that the guys found that was a champagne flavored marshmallow toasting kit. You probably would never know it. But so we were able to get people to come together, and at times we had 40, 50 people on these quizzes. That was superfluous. It was more which cocktail did you get? Let's have some fun. Let's collaborate and talk. We did various things using online games. Escape rooms were on there. And what the focus was everything we put in place was not really work orientated. they're already doing that. You know, we obviously had things like morning check-ins. Every morning, a well-being check-in. Jump on a call. Is everyone okay? You know, how's the family? Anyone got any risks? Everybody got all the kit they need? How are your customers? Any problems? But it was all outside of the work. You know, these guys are good at dealing with their work problems. What we wanted to know was, how are you? And we wanted to demonstrate as a company, we were thinking of them. We were, you know, willing to put a little bit of extra effort in. Budgetary wise, you know, things were tight, obviously, but we didn't have huge travel expenses bills. So we were like, let's start sending things to people's houses that are well structured, well thought through, and facilitated them getting together on various different online activities. We also did some other things. We looked at, you know, and Katie mentioned this, but, you know, how do you plan through that for what's going to be? One of the things that we, you know, predicted was, you know, how is holiday going to be treated through this time? Everyone's going to cancel their holiday, we can't go anywhere, and then it all builds up, and come September, when you sort of return in some normality, everyone wants to take their holiday, and it's our busiest time of year. So we sort of looked at, you know, what are the options? And I've, you know, a lot of friends that are senior in businesses, and made up my own version in the end. You know, some companies were forcing holiday to be taken, some weren't. And we went the other way. I said, listen, every week you book, you get an extra day, free holiday, a free extra day, but take it in this period. Spend that time with your family, you know, and have some fun. But the trade-off was they're using that holiday, so it didn't all mount up to the end of the year. And we didn't have to face a situation come September of declining people's holidays. No, obviously that's changed anyway. We all booked our holidays and had them all cancelled. So it didn't come to fruition. But at the same time, it was just important to say, let's manage those behaviours. Let's try and smooth out this year. Keep everyone engaged with the business, and that was the important thing. They're engaged together, engaged with their families. You lose that contact to your company because they're not in the office and so on. So everything we did was around really thoughtful, small gifts that said, hey, this is what we're, you know, your COVID gifts. It was amazing. With all the different things that we did, we run surveys every week, you know, so we have our 360-degree feedback loops using software, where people are saying how they feel, what was great. Amazingly, the littlest things had the most impact. You know, fantastic little gifts. Thanks, Xledger, for sending me this stuff. My kids love the marshmallows. They didn't have the champagne ones. You know, it was people just engaging and knowing that we were still thinking of them, I think, is that's great.
Yeah, I think you've nailed it during the period of time. I certainly haven't heard of any other clients that we work with coming up with such creative ideas as that, and consistently as well, which is the most important thing. Katie spoke about fail fast, learn fast, and how that needs to be, you know, the mentality at the moment for leaders in order to be agile and adapt. What would you say has been the biggest mistake that you've made in lockdown that had a huge silver lining?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I think, you know, we're learning from our behavior all the time. And I think the first thing that we did was set a vision. So set that target. This is where we want to end up. That was a very different outlook from what everyone was used to. We had monetary growth. We had, you know, customer-based growth. We kind of scrapped all that and said, let's look after our customers. I want to end up with all the customers at the end of this that we started with. So we changed that focus. What we had to do that was sort of almost a mistake of prior to COVID was this acceptance. I mentioned it briefly, but it's good to go into detail where there was just this common acceptance of our business and how it provided the operational support for our customers. That was majority online, majority face-to-face prior to COVID. We had to very quickly learn how to change that model to delivering remotely and online. Ironically, our guys were great. You know, it wasn't an internal issue, it's more of an external. Can you implement, can you support, which is such a business critical software as your accounting and your finance? Can I pay my people? Can I get paid? Can I pay my bills? You know, it's the real fundamentals of a business. And we had to demonstrate that we could do that. That bit we had to do quickly. Everything else you can trial and error, you can fail fast and move quickly. That we had to get right. So I think what we would, you know, had we had this hindsight to start all over again, we would have done some of that before. What we're ending up with now is most likely a hybrid model where it is far more operationally effective to deliver a lot of the core elements of how to put a software into an organization, how to train mass volumes of people on using that software, how to give them that remote support that they're comfortable with. but there are still going to be some elements that we need to go back to being face-to-face. You know, you still need to build relationships, and there's nothing, even though now it's an elbow bump than than a handshake, it's still vital that we get out when we can and establish those relationships. But that is a fraction of the amount of time that we used to spend traveling and you know, guys out there seeing, and that sort of global and that particularly regional acceptance of that's the way things can happen now is what we have to learn from and implement moving forward. The silver lining from that is basically the silver lining operation, and we can now be far more efficient. We looked at, you know, one of the things that we wanted to do moving into that model was during this process we've upscaled our office, taken a much larger space, and this is now, you know, already committed this in, but it's not an office anymore. It's our X hub. It's the hub for where we can facilitate people delivering remote work, account management, sales, all of those, you know, the training, the implementation, all of those things can be delivered remotely. We still want those delivered remotely from our hub, not from our homes, because of all the other benefits of that. So we changed a lot of the design here. We created focus rooms. We created training suites, lots of meeting rooms, lots of collaboration space, fun areas where we just want them to get their creativity back and problem solve, which happens far more naturally when you're in the same shared space. So that's what we've learned. Now, we would have made the mistake of just creating a pretty dull, normal standard office, banks of desks and all the usual stuff. Now it's driven us to completely rethink the sort of space that we want people to work within. If they want to work from home, but why would you? You know, make the choice when we can, and this thing has hopefully passed, come back to this hub. We're far more effective, but hey, worst comes to the worst, we can still function. You can still deliver everything you need. Our customers still have the support they need, and we're good with that. You know,
we're seeing a lot of that at the moment. Businesses looking at the campus model for their workspace, which is going to be completely different to what we're used to in traditional offices. Just back to, I guess, your leadership style, Mark. How have you managed to maintain the balance between your sort of go-to leadership style, which you've trusted over the years, versus the ability to learn and evolve during this time? And I guess where you can, sort of pulling it back to the process, people and technology areas that Katie talked about.
Yeah, I mean, good question. So I think from a technology perspective, you know, cloud is the key word, isn't it? Remote access, being able to function using a software from anywhere. That's pretty easy. We can all figure that one out. People, I think, is the focus on people and the difference now of what is expected from a leader. One of the things that I'd always worked with was, you know, I had the obligation to make decisions that were well-rounded, they were structured, and they were well learned, i.e. there was good analytics, there was good data, there was good insight. That has gone away a little bit in this period. There's a lot of fundamental things still are the same, but when it comes to people and how we operate, we're in a new world. You just got to go with your moral compass. Now, we set out what our culture was at the beginning of last year. We've stuck to that. We've hired to that culture. We've been very strict, and we work with you guys very closely. You know how picky we are and how much of this is based on culture. What that enables myself and my leadership team to do is to be very human about the decisions we make. We demonstrate the decision-making process now. We talk to people or representatives of groups of people to ensure that we've considered everything from a person perspective. We draw on that experience more than ever that we've got within the walls of our hub or people that are working from home. And we've become good at deploying systems and processes that facilitate getting that information in and deploying it back out very quickly. A lot of what we do is over Zoom. You sit on a morning and say, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. You've all had your contribution. Everybody happy, let's go. The other thing that we learn is how much you can rely on people's forgiveness. You don't have to get it right fundamentally all the time. They're quite happy to be included in that process. And as long as you're transparent and you're explaining it, then you can, you move forward as a whole with everybody part of your team. So the one thing that I've had to change is the amount of time dedicated to that process. Historically, we could all look at ourselves fairly judgmentally and say, oh, I was too arrogant back then. I just had to make the decision and move on because I had a lot of decisions to make. Now it's vitally important that that process is amended to be far more empathetic, far more considerate of what are the knock-on impacts of these things, to a world that we were afforded the ability to relatively ignore before. You know, we didn't have to focus so much on people's home lives and families. Yes, we're aware of it. We're a good cultural-based company, but now it's mandatory. You've got to consider those things. So dedication of time to that well-being, that communication, that transparency, all that means is as a whole, we're moving on, moving forward together. There's less of a, my leader's going to tell me where to go. My leader's going to do all of that work and then tell me about it, and I'm on the same direction. I'll use an example. We spent a lot of time with Pat Lamb, the director of rugby over at the Bears, and he had this great anecdote of when he first started and took over that team. There was, when he first started, there were lots of buses, all vaguely heading in the same direction with something plugged into the sat nav. His job was to get one bus and get everyone on that bus. The next was get everyone sat in the right seats. And he's merely driving the bus, but they're all saying it's this way. That really sort of resonated with me at the meeting we had with him in March, just before this started. And you kind of got to stick to that now. Are you on the bus? Because if you're not, let me explain where our bus is, what direction it's going, and what seat you're in. How do you contribute to this? You're sat in that seat because this is what you do, and that contributes to the whole bus moving in the right direction. So we kind of stole that from him, use that regularly internally, and there's a lot of conversations about, hey, get on the bus, this is the direction we're going, and it really helps with our attracting talent, bringing people in, them adopting that culture, and it gives them something to sort of
we are now on the hour, so we'll be diving into Q&A shortly, so don't be shy, everyone. If you can just put in your questions, then we've got myself or Matt will ask those questions to Mark or Katie on your behalf, so feel free. No question's a silly question, but as we're gathering those, one last question for you, Mark. What's the one nugget of practical advice that you'd like to leave the audience with today?
I think trust in yourself and your people. I think the listening, understanding what people's objectives are, and demonstrating that you can listen to those and then action those. But I think it's just all about being empathetic. Having a good cultural compass. We coined that phrase here is, what does our cultural compass tell us? Not a moral, or there's all sorts of compasses everybody lives by, but this is the direction we choose. This is the sort of people we've hired. We've got to stay true to that culture now. And every time we get a tricky conversation or a tricky decision to be made, what's our cultural compass tell us?
Thanks, Mark. So we've got Matt Robinson in the background, who has been gathering up some questions that have come through. So I'll let Matt fire away, and we've got Katie back in the room. Hi, Katie. I think you're. There we are. Good stuff.
Yes, thanks, Leo. I'm just looking at some of the questions. The first one's for Katie. What do you think you would want your legacy to be during this time as a leader? I think that's come from your presentation.
I guess kind of in line with what Mark just said about trust, really, and trust in each other and yourself. And I think be approachable. I think if you could look back, or your team can look back over the last 8 months and be that person who over communicated and ultimately was human. I think everyone understands that from a business perspective, some tough decisions are going to need to be made. It's the reality of what we're in. But I think having that humanity, having that human touch, over communicating, putting people first, I think, you're going to make mistakes. You're only human. I think it's okay to be vulnerable with that and admit your mistakes. But I think if people can look back and say, do you know what? They were fair. They put us first as much as they could. I don't think you could ask for any more than that. I think that's probably what I would say would be a great leadership legacy during, what are undoubtedly really challenging times.
Thanks, Katie. A question from Mark. In Katie's presentation, she talked about maintaining balance. So to you, how have you managed to maintain a balance personally?
It depends what we mean by balance. I think, obviously we've all faced and been in that same boat where everyone has a family, everyone has older members of their family. You're trying to balance your work-life balance. But I think from my perspective personally, everything was just, obviously I can make my family secure. Simple as that. We worked from home for that initial period of time. Post that, it was extending that feeling to the business. It's not a different process. What were the considerations I had for myself making my family safe? why not consider the same things for our workplace? You know, is our workplace secure? Do I want people to travel on public transport? Well, if I'm saying no to my kids, why would I say yes to my staff? So we followed the same premise that said, well, you know, we're looking down, we're not going to do these things, and that's because that's my opinion of how we're going to keep ourselves safe. And obviously following, it's a government guideline, you can't, in theory, you shouldn't go too far wrong if you do that. We applied that same thing to the rules within our business. That, you know, forced balance. It was just our approach.
Excellent. Thanks, Mark. Here's another question, I think probably for Katie and Mark. What impact do you think the pandemic will have on working behaviours in the future?
Ladies first, or would you
sorry, Matt. So what behaviours?
What impact do you think the pandemic will have on working behaviours in the future?
I think, you know, if we take the, you know, look at the silver lining aspect here, I think the flexibility piece is going to be fantastic in terms of the diversity and inclusion aspect. I think, you know, a lot of, you know, myself included, a lot of my friends, I think being a working parent, I think some good's going to come out of this. I really do. I think, you know, being able to bookend the day with the school runs, but being able to be more flexible, that ability to work from home. So I do think there are some really good opportunities to see that as a positive. I think that's going to change the people we hire. I think the whole hiring process is going to change. But I think, you know, when I look at Robert Half and I look at how we're, you know, obviously not over the next 4 weeks perhaps, but we're trying to challenge that remote and, you know, have that hybrid of half in the office, half of it home. You know, that's tough. And I think that's still for us to work out. I think Mark alluded to the importance of connection. I think we've all realised how important that is, just being physically with people. It's not the same, no matter how innovative you make the Zoom calls, how much fun you try and have with them. It's not the same as being in an office together and feel like you're winning together. But I do think the behaviours that we'll see are more of individual ownership, individual accountability, and trusting. I think we've all had to take a huge leap of trust with trusting everyone to work from home. And on the whole, it's worked out pretty well. I think that hopefully, as long as it continues, I think they're probably the key behaviours I think we'll continue to see as we evolve over the next 12 months, 18 months, you know, maybe 2 years. I don't know whether you'd say anything different, Mark, or add anything to that.
Yeah, no, I don't think anything different. I think, you know, and everything is, it's only our opinion, but this is what I'm going to do. We're moving forward with, you know, a hybrid model. What we have learned is that people can be effective working from home. And I think what we're walking away as Xledger, and what I want to do moving forward past this lockdown phase, is focus on two things. And one is effectiveness and the other is well-being. There is a massive element of well-being that we did not and were not aware of before. So, and effectiveness. Some people are perfectly fine working from home. They've done it for years, you know, and they're good at it. Some people aren't. They don't enjoy it. They don't have the working environment at home that they need. So what are we going to do? We put in place core hours. One thing we learned was the mornings and evenings, you know, school runs during this is a bit of a nightmare. So you don't need to be in the office for that period of time. You can get it at 10, you can leave at 3 and top and tail. Because of this experience, we know that people will fulfill their workload outside of those hours, but they're perfectly capable of managing that. The business needs to give them the flexibility and the opportunity to make that decision. What I want to see is that connection to the business, that creativity, that problem solving, that interaction, that collaboration needs an environment to make that effective. That's what the office hub is for. Does it determine whether you can or can't work from home? No, but it should be a choice to work from that hub. It's more fun, I'm more effective, it's better for my well-being. On the odd day here and there, hey, I just need to work from home because the boiler's being repaired. That's no different to before. We just got to be, you know, trusting of those people, provide the options as an organisation, and let them fit into those, but give guidelines around effectiveness.
If there's any other outstanding questions, please feel free to type them in now whilst I'm just summarising. But I would just like to thank you, Mark. It was lovely listening to you today. What a story. As Leo said, you know, there aren't many companies who could, you know, write what you've achieved in the last 8 months. I think obviously the whole team must be super proud. and like you say, I think if you can focus on those two things is moving forward around effectiveness and that kind of hybrid model, there's no reason to say you won't continue that. So from, on behalf of Leo, myself and Matt and Rob behalf, thank you so much. Thank you to Ben for inviting us and Mark to be part of the Tech Fest today. And, please, we'll send to all of you the takeaway document, but you've got mine, Mark's, Leo's details. If anyone would prefer to ask us a question individually, please feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn or ping us an email following the event. So thank you for everyone's time today. Stay safe. We've still got to wash our hands lots and all the rest of it. But thank you again for joining, and all the best.